Please join me in welcoming Gail Lockman McDowell back to Penn Engineering.
So this being a graduation speech, and since I'm essentially a professional interviewer, it's fitting that I should start off with asking you this question. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? But I'm not going to actually ask you that because, to be honest, I don't really like the question. I don't believe in it. And the reason is that I just don't think it's practical. So to be clear, I have no issue with setting goals. Goals are fine. It's fine to say, maybe I might want to potentially do this thing and eventually. But this idea that you can have a plan for what your life is going to look like in 10 years and lay out this detailed strategy to get there, I just don't think that's really feasible. Nor, for that matter, am I sure it's really even a good idea. So if I think back to where I was 10 years ago, I was pretty much literally in your shoes, or robes, as may be appropriate. And if you asked me then what I wanted to do, the things I would have said I absolutely do not want to do is being an author and being an entrepreneur. So the reason I didn't want to be a writer is that, there's really nothing in it for me. I didn't really think that I was good at writing. I didn't really enjoy it either. And from pretty much everything everyone has ever said, writing is not exactly a lucrative profession. So you've pretty much ruled out every possible reason to pursue a career. As for being an entrepreneur, the reason it didn't appeal to me is, I'd seen that. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, literally like my mother, my father, stepfather, grandparents, aunts, so everywhere. And it seemed like a really, really hard lifestyle. I'd watched most closely my mother start several companies, and it seemed really hard, really, really stressful. And I just thought, this isn't really the lifestyle I wanted. So I figured I would probably wind up on the technology management track, moving up at a big company. And of course, 10 years later, I'm basically doing exactly the opposite of what I said I would do. So I'm running Career Cup, as for those of you who paid attention, is a website around coding interviews and technical interviewing. I've written a couple books, and one of which is doing pretty well on Amazon. Well, a couple of them are, but so I'm doing basically exactly what I said I wouldn't do. And what it seems like is it turns out, at least based on if you go on sales metrics, I can actually write, at least for the little niche that I write in. And it turns out that actually founding a company is actually a much more compatible lifestyle than I had imagined. It's, being an entrepreneur comes with there's certain things that come with the territory. Yes, it can be scary and unpredictable and hard, but it also comes with a degree of freedom and control and impact that I didn't really get to see as a kid growing up, watching other people do it. I didn't get to see what that was like. I only saw the bad parts. And so this thing that I swore off, it turns out it lets me do so many things that I love. It lets me solve hard problems. I still get to code all the time. I also get to teach, which is another thing I love doing. I get to explain hard concepts to people, and I know that I'm making impact on other people as well. And so I got to blend all these things into this very strange little niche business. So how did I get to be doing exactly what I said I wouldn't do? To be honest, it kind of happened. It sort of found me more so than I really found it. So it started actually back when I was at Penn. I was a TA for Max Mintz, the infamous Max Mintz. And one of my students came to me and asked me if I could just take some notes on the different companies I was interviewing with. She said, I was a year ahead of her, so she thought this might be useful for her. So, okay, sure, yes, I'll go take these notes. And so I started this little Word document at first of all these questions and this and that about interviewing. And that was all fine and good, but of course I'm an engineer, so instead of creating this nice little one-time Word document, that was all I needed, I wildly over-engineered a solution and created a website and let people add questions and did way more work than was actually necessary to solve the problem. And then that funny thing, that little toy website grew and grew, and people started to actually like it, and they started to use it. And 2 years later, when I was at Google, I was somehow on the side running this little website. All started from this request I got. And if you'd asked me then what I wanted to do, eventually, still I would have said I do not want to found a company, even though inadvertently I honestly didn't realize it at the time, I was actually already doing that. The book stuff, writing, started kind of similarly. Some of my visitors, my website users, had asked me for some additional resources on interviewing, and there were a few other things out there, but I figured I would go ahead and do it. So I created a little thing. It wasn't very serious, 20-page little document right above some advice. And then, again, without really expecting it, that grew and that got really popular and people really liked it. And eventually, as I started expanding it, it turned into what was actually legitimately could be called a book. Again, did not want to be a writer. And then the consulting, the other thing I do. Again, it just kind of happened. A CEO a couple years ago who's a CEO of a local startup emailed me and asked me if I could come in and help his team. He was about to go through an acquisition and wanted to know if, he'd read my book and wanted to know if I could come in and help prepare their teams for the interviews that they were about to go through. They were essentially about to interview for their own jobs, so they thought maybe preparation would be a good idea. And this would entail basically interviewing all day for about a week. And I had done this at Google. I had been flown into places to just do interview after interview after interview. So I knew what that was like, and I knew I didn't actually like it. It was really, really exhausting to have to just interview people all day, every day. So I was about to say no. And then I stopped myself. See, I had developed this little rule for myself from my past experience, and it's very complicated. So I'll explain the steps. It goes like this. It's called Say Yes. And how it works is when somebody emails me or asks me to do something, instead of saying no, I say yes instead. Very complicated. And there were exceptions, of course. There could be other time commitments, whatever. But only for really good reasons. And I don't really feel like it doesn't qualify as a really good reason. So I realized by then that a lot of the best things that happen to us in life are not things that we can project. They aren't things that we can plan on. It's not like we can say, to get to point D, I better do point A and then point B and then point C, and then eventually I'll get there. So much of the best things that happen to us are just things that happen. There's just so much luck and randomness in life. So, begrudgingly, I said yes, fine, because I figured I'd have to follow my own rule. This is advice I'd given to other people, so I was like, I better follow my own advice. Rules are rules. And it turned out that although I thought that I would hate this thing, I actually liked it. Teaching people to interview was very different from a real interview. A real interview, you're actually assessing the person, and then you have to write up this lengthy feedback, and and more often than not, you end up just basically justifying why to reject somebody. Teaching people how to interview as a candidate was totally different. It got to bring in a lot of the computer science that I loved. I got to actually teach some cool stuff that I hadn't thought about since I was a TA years ago. And so it was just totally different. And so though doing real interviews all day was really tedious, being an interviewer and teaching interviewing was actually really interesting. So things went well. The company did get acquired. And then that CEO had other friends who were going through similar experiences. And then pretty soon I had this little line of business that was, I guess, called acquisition interview consulting. And nobody could have possibly have said 10 years ago that that was something I would end up doing, let alone create a plan for doing this. There's no way, because nobody actually knew this even existed as a service that people would ever want. And so this linear plan of where you're going to be in 10 years, it's just not realistic. So a few months after this company got acquired, the same CEO said, who's now at this bigger company, one of the kind of big Silicon Valley companies, he sent me another email updating me on what had happened and said, hey, we're going through a lot of hiring changes. Can you come in and help our interviewers learn how to interview candidates? Now, to be honest, at this point in time, I hadn't done that before. I spent a lot of time thinking about interviewing, but on the other side, and I'd never been on the other side and started thinking about how to teach people how to interview. But again, there is that rule. Say yes. So, okay. So I said yes, I agreed to do this thing, and then, again, referrals, he had friends. Pretty soon, this was a new line of business for me, something I never really thought about doing a lot. And the crazy thing is that none of this could have happened, none of it, without that one little yes years ago from one of my students, and then all the little dozens of yeses along the way. It's so easy to say no. We say no to things because we don't feel like it, because it sounds boring, because we're busy, because we don't really see what we'll get out of it, because the opportunity seems too small and not really worth our time, or because it seems too big and we're not really sure we're good enough to tackle that just yet. But when we do that, we miss out on so much. The truth is that you don't really know where life is going to lead. You don't know what you're actually going to love until you're doing it. And you don't know what you're really going to be good at until you're there. If you only say yes in life to the things that get you from point A to point B, you're going to miss out on all the luck and randomness in life. You may wind up chasing a dream that you don't actually want and foreclosing yourself to all the things you actually would want. Say yes to all of the unknown and the unpredictable and even the no's. Open yourself up to all the opportunities that they can bring. And run like crazy once you get there, wherever you are 10 years from now. Thank you.